Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. So for today's session, it's going to be a really open-ended session. So you can feel free to unmute yourself or send your chats through the Zoom if you have any questions along the way. And today's session is going to be going through a spouse client file from start to finish. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the screen that you first get to when you log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients you've added in. So to add a new client, you're just going to go up to the add button, and then the key fields are going to be first name and last name. So this is going to be Ben Collins. The email field, that's there if you want to send the client the online questionnaire. So you'd put in their email, you'd click this use questionnaire box, and then when you click add, you're going to get two options. You can either send the questionnaire directly from eState Planner, or you can copy a special link that you can send to the client from your own email, and that way you can sort of customize the email a little bit more. Either way, the client's going to receive the link to their questionnaire, and then they're going to be prompted to create a password just so that their information stays secure and so that they don't have to complete it all in one sitting. And then they go through and enter their profile, family tree, asset, and debt information. And anything they put into that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate back into your system. So it can save a lot of time with the manual entry when you have the clients just do it themselves. But you don't have to send them the questionnaire. So if you're not going to send the questionnaire, don't worry about putting in the email and don't click this use questionnaire box. And then you can just collect the information another way. If you have like a PDF questionnaire, Word questionnaire that you like to use, your own, or maybe you like to get the information in the meeting from them on your end. So you've got those options as well. And then we're just going to add Ben to the system. And since today we're doing a spouse client file, this means that we're doing wills for both spouses. And if if we want to generate documents for the both of them, then they both have to be added as separate clients in the system. And then we can link them together using the spouse client function so that shared family tree and joint asset information will automatically populate in both their profiles. And then if it's like a mirror will situation, you can sync the planning and the appointments as well. So let's add in the spouse, Lauren Collins. And the key field when you're adding in the spouse is to click this spouse client field and pick the name of the first spouse. So you need to add in the other spouse first, just normally without using the spouse client function in order to get them in the system. And then when you're adding the second spouse, you're going to click spouse client and pick the first spouse's name from the drop down list. And then we'll add. Then you can just decide who you're going to start with. So today I'll start with Ben. So I'll just click on his name to go into his profile. And this is what your family tree is going to look like if you haven't sent the client the questionnaire, or if you have but they haven't filled anything out yet. So you're going to start with the client and the spouse. And so usually what I like to do first is edit the client's information. And you can do that by just double clicking right on the client's icon. And really the key things you're going to want to make sure are filled out for anyone is going to be first name, last name, and gender, just so that the wording of the will comes out properly. The also known as for the client will populate as well. So Ben's also known as Benny Collins. You can put that in there and that will populate in the will. Date of birth, you can find it on the calendar or you can just type it in if that's easier. And then the age will automatically populate for you. You can pick a country, you can do citizenship, and then all this other information it's good to have on your client to make sure you've done an adequate investigation, but it's not going to affect the generation of the will itself. Then residency is important because however you set the province as here is how the system's going to know how to generate the probate tax on the assets tab. But more importantly, it's how the system's going to know which precedent to generate. So if you're from Nova Scotia or BC or Alberta, you're going to want to make sure the province is changed to your correct province to make sure the correct precedents are generating. The city field is also important for the client because it will populate in the will. So it'll say Ben Collins of the City of Toronto. So you want to make sure that's filled out. Special circumstances for anyone that's not the client, is a place where you could note any potential capacity issues. So you could note if they have vision issues, you just type in the description below there. And then relationships is just going to tell you who they're related to on the family tree. And this add button is only if you're changing the relationship. So if you realize that you've added in a child and they aren't actually the child of the other spouse, you can use this relationship section to fix it instead of having to delete the person off the family tree and re-add them. There's Ben. Let's add in a child next. So the way the family tree works is through direct relationships. So whoever the blue circle is around is who you're adding to. So you just click once on the icon to get the blue circle around them, and then you go up to the add button and you select the relationship. And whenever you're adding a child, it's going to ask you who the other parent is. If it's Lauren Collins, the current spouse, a new parent, so an ex-spouse that is going to be involved in the will, so you want to add them to the family tree, or a single parent, so either the ex-spouse isn't involved or they're genuinely a single parent. But we're just going to say it's Lauren. And then you can enter in the child's information. We're going to say this is John Collins, male, date of birth, July 19th, 2000. And then the special circumstances section for anyone that's not the client is a place where you can note sort of relationship difficulties or estrangement, but most importantly, disability. So if the individual is disabled, you're going to want to make sure to click off that box so the system can pick up on the fact that this is an individual that's disabled. And later on, when you're creating a trust for them and you're setting it up to be fully discretionary to the death of the beneficiary, it's going to draft a special Henson trust clause in the will. So you have to first make sure this is checked off over here so the system can pick up on the fact that this individual is disabled. Then let's say we wanted to add a grandchild. So for grandchildren, you can't just add them directly to the client. What you have to do is add a child to the client, click on the child's icon, and add a child to that child. We're going to say he's a single parent. And that's how you would get the grandchild's information in. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You would click on the client's icon, add a sibling to the client, click on the sibling's icon, and add a child to the sibling. If there's going to be anybody else involved in the will in either a beneficiary or a trustee capacity that doesn't fit on the family tree, you can go over to this All tab, and it's going to list everyone you've added in, and it's going to give you the option to add in other people that aren't family. So you just go to the Add button. Let's say Jordy's going to be involved in this will later on. So we're going to add him in here. And so you can add in all the information, and then it's going to ask you about the relationship. So who's Jordy related to? He's related to Ben, the client, and he is a friend of Ben's. And then you can add that in. So now Jordy's going to be in the system. So later on, if I'm picking trustees or beneficiaries, I'm going to be able to choose him as one of the individuals from the drop-down list. So that's the People tab. Are there any questions so far? No? Okay. Well, if you do have any questions along the way, don't hesitate to just unmute yourself, or you can send it through the chat if that's easier. Can you include multiple AKAs? So that's a good question. So whenever you're putting in an AKA, the only field that it's going to count for is for the client. So anyone else, it's not going to populate in the will, just for the client. But you could put in multiple if you wanted. You could say Benji Collins as well. You could type it in like that and then just say. So the next section is asset. So this is where you're going to list all the client's assets that you've added into the system. You're always going to start with the general personal effects, just to remind you to gift them to someone in the will, so that it triggers a special general personal effects clause. For any other assets, you can add in all the client's assets and give them values and give them a sense of what the net value of their estate's looking like at this point in time. But Really, for the will generation itself, the only assets that you need to add in this section are those that are going to be specific asset bequests or registered assets that you want to confirm or do new designations for. So you're just going to go up to the add button, and then let's say we'll start with a bank account. And really, for any asset that you add into the system, the key field is this asset name field, because this is how it's going to be referred to throughout the system and in the will itself if you're going to gift it as a specific asset bequest. So I usually like to put all the identifying information right in that asset name field so that if I'm adding in multiple bank accounts, it's not just called bank account or bank account copy. It'll be, this is the RBC bank account. The other one's the CIBC savings account. So I know that I'm planning for the correct asset. You don't have to put in a balance or value, but you can, and it's going to automatically calculate the probate tax according to the client's residency if you do. And then let's just add this one. Next, let's go for a home. So again, maybe they've got multiple homes. Maybe this is the family home. You could type that in there. The address field, if you are gifting this asset as a specific bequest in the will, the address field will populate. Let's say the current value is $1 million. You also have this mortgage/encumbrances field. So if there is a mortgage on the property, you're going to want to put the value of the mortgage in this field here and not add it as a separate debt on the debts tab. So best practice is to just put in the value of the mortgage right here if it's associated with a specific asset, because it's good to know what asset it's associated with, and it also has an effect on how much probate tax is calculated for this asset. The one thing you want to just make sure you're not doing is adding it in as a value here and then adding it as a separate debt on the debts tab, because it will double count it. So just add it in either the debts tab or here, but the best practice is to just add it in here. Ownership, you can say joint, tenants in common. Let's say it's joint with Lauren. And because they're linked together, this family home will now already appear in her asset list. Let's do one more. We'll go for an RRSP. So again, I'm going to put in the identifying information right in that asset name field. Beneficiary, this is just for information purposes as to who the current beneficiary is on the policy. Later on, you're going to be able to confirm or do a new designation and then decide if you want this to populate in the will. Current value, let's say it's 100,000. So the probate tax always automatically calculates, but the income tax doesn't. And this is just due to the variability of different clients' tax brackets. So what we usually like to do is try and estimate the highest possible tax it could incur. So for something like an RRSP, we put in like 50% of that. For an asset that with a capital gain, we would do like 25% of that gain, just so you're giving them a sense of the highest possible tax they could be looking at. So that's the Assets tab. Any questions here? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going. Debts, it's really more for planning. You just add a debt. We're not going to put in a mortgage because we already did. We don't want to double count it. But let's say there's a credit card, so we'll just add that in. Then we get to scenarios, and this is really the most important part of the system. This is sort of where all the planning occurs. And the idea is that at most, there's 3 scenarios that you're going to plan for. And the idea is you go through and create a plan for each scenario. So you start with surviving spouse. What happens if the spouse is still around when the client's passed away? Then descendants only. So both the spouse and the client have passed, but there's still kids or grandkids around. No descendants. This is ultimate disaster. Everyone's gone. What's happening? So there's 2 ways you can go about doing it. You can do it manually by clicking into a scenario and going through each of the sections. So the joint designated asset section is where you're going to put any assets that are joint or designated with to another individual to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts is where you're going to create your specific asset requests or your cash legacies. And the balance of the estate is how you're going to divide up the residue, either by adding segments and creating gifts within the segments if it's a more complicated residue breakdown, or by running a macro if it's more of a simple residue breakdown that matches one of our macros on our pre-populated list. So you can do that, or if you're dealing with a typical client situation, a faster way to do it is to use e-plans, which is this little lightning bolt up in the top corner. And these are basically like giant macros that go through the system and create a plan for you. And the good thing about this is you can run one of these, and if it at least shares some of the details, then it can save some time, but you can always make any changes that you want to it. So it's just giving you a starting point. So I'm going to run this last one. And now what it shows me is we're still in the surviving spouse scenario. So it shows that the RSP and the family home are going to Lauren. It's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, it's given the general personal effects to Lauren because this is what triggers that special general personal effects clause coming up in the will. And then the balance of the estate, it's created a segment to Lauren, absolute 100%. No gift over because the second scenario, that descendants only scenario, is going to be our gift over. So we don't need to put anything here. So this is what I would have wanted to do. So I don't need to make any changes to this scenario. I can go to the second one. No joint or designated asset. Initial gifts is given the general personal effects to the class of children here. So let me just show what you would do if you wanted to do this manually. So you're just going to drag and drop the general personal effects over. And then you've got people, classes, charity. And I'm going to do the class of children. And you can now add distribution methods in. So maybe I'm going to want the personal effects distributed according to the trustee's discretion. And then we'll just add that in. And then the balance of the estate, we've got a segment going to the children. And it's in a trust 100%, same trustees as executors. The duration is when the beneficiary reaches age 30. But let's say I want to change it. I want it to be when they reach age 25. And then the mandatory payments, I want to change this as well. So I want to say at 21, they get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over, first to beneficiaries issue, then to the other class members. So I'm going to save. And now what I've done is I've used the e-plan, but then I've made the changes so that it's ultimately the trust that I wanted to create, but I didn't have to start from scratch. So it saved me some time there. And then you've got this sync button up in the top corner. So if Lauren is going to want her descendants only scenario to be the same as Ben's, then you can sync this over. And you can do this for each of the scenarios. And what it's going to do is it's going to sync anything that's joint between the two, or it's going to sync the residue breakdown as well. So this can save a lot of time when you're going back and reviewing Lauren's. It's going to be basically already planned unless she has any changes in her will. Then we'll go to the last scenario, no descendant. So the E-plan, what it's done is it's given half to siblings and half to spouses' siblings. I don't necessarily have to plan for this scenario. I can just clear it and leave it if I have maybe a really big family. I don't think we're ever going to get to this point. But I do want to create a plan. Let's say I want to give half to Jordy and half to a charity. So I'm not going to run a macro because it's not going to match any on the list. But what I'm going to do is do it manually by creating segments and gifts within the segment. So I'm going to start with my first segment for 50%. And now I have to specify what's happening to this 50%. So I'm going to do that by adding a gift. Pick Jordy as my beneficiary. It's going to be absolute 100%. This means 100% of the 50% gift. So I'm not dividing up this 50% even further. I want all of the 50% to go to Jordy. And then we'll put in a gift over to beneficiaries issue, and then we'll add that in. So now if I look at the circles, I can see that of this 50% segment, I've dealt with 100% of it. So I don't want to add any more gifts. What I want to do is deal with the other 50% segment. So I do that by clicking on this little grayed out segments button, and then I add my second segment for the other 50%. And I'll add a gift. I'm going to do a charity. And the cool thing is, if you search in this search bar, it's going to search right through the CRA database for you. And if you click on this little eye, you can see that it's pulled all that information right from the CRA database. So it's got the registration number and everything in. So I'm going to pick Epilepsy Toronto, and then I'm going to add this in. So now I've dealt with 100% of this 50%, and therefore I've dealt with 100% of everything. And I can sync this over to Lauren as well. So that's the scenarios section. Any questions here? No? Okay, we'll keep going. So the next section is appointments, and this is where you're going to appoint your estate trustees or your guardians. And because we ran the e-plan, it's already made Lauren, the spouse, the primary estate trustee. But to add anyone else, you're just going to go to the add button. You can choose people or trust corporations. If you choose a trust corporation, their special clauses will appear automatically in the will. But I'm going to pick Jordy's going to be an appointee. And then condition is what either makes them a primary or an alternate. So if you want them to be a primary, you're always going to select none. So you're going to put no conditions on there. If you want them to be an alternate, then you can pick a condition. And usually I pick if all specified cannot act, and then I check the specified line to make sure it's correct. So it's now telling me Lauren, if Lauren can't act, Jordy. And I could even do a further alternate. I'm going to say John. And then I'm going to do the same condition if all specified cannot act, but I'm going to change the person on the specified line to Jordy. So now it's going to read Lauren, if Lauren can't act, Jordy, if Jordy can't act, John. And then I can sync over to the spouse up in the top corner. And the last thing we're going to go over today is provisions. So there's a couple of different things here. The first is funeral arrangements. So if you want those in the will, you can just type them on the line and this will populate in the will. But if not, just delete this text and there won't be a body disposition clause in the will. Include future members is if you want future members included in the definition of the class. So we use the class gift of children in that second scenario. So if I check this box, then it's going to define children as John Collins and any other child born to or adopted by me and my spouse. So if I do want that, if I'm dealing with a young couple, it's probably going to have future children that are going to want to be included. Then I'm going to make sure that box is checked off. Same kind of thing for class restrictions. You can restrict certain members of being part of a class. Here's your general trust for beneficiaries under a certain age. So it's not going to affect any trust that you've set up in the will, but it's going to cover underage beneficiaries like grandchildren that might get it through a gift over underage, and that haven't had specific trust set up in the will for them. So it's just going to follow this. You can change the duration if you want, but the default's just set at 25. And then secondary will assets. This is if you're doing multiple wills, so primary and secondary. Then this is where you can pick and choose which definitions are included in the secondary will. So this is just definitions. They don't need to actually necessarily have these assets, but maybe they will in the future. It's just saying what the secondary will could potentially cover. Then I'm going to go up to this little exclamation point in the circle up here, the advisor insights. And these are like contextual alerts that help make sure you're not missing anything in the planning process. So sometimes it'll tell you if you've missed putting in something in the system, like residency or gender, and you can go back and input that information and it will disappear from your list of insights. But some of them are always going to populate, like this request prior wills and powers of attorney. And you don't need to make them disappear. It's just a good idea to sort of review them to make sure you're not missing any important planning things, and you can be more confident in your plan after you review all of these. Beside it is just notes. So you could make any notes on your client here, and these notes appear at the end of the text summary. And then the last button is the generation button, where you're going to generate all your documents and your summaries. So first of all, there's 3 summaries that you can generate. There's the profile summary, and it's going to give you all the information that the clients filled out in their questionnaire or that you filled out for them if you haven't sent the questionnaire. So it's got all of the profile information on the client, all the different members of the family tree, all the asset and debt information as well. So this can be a great resource to give to the client after the planning meeting so they can review spelling of names and asset details and make sure all of that's correct. The second one is the graphic scenario summary. So it's going to give you a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios. So if you're adding in values on the assets tab, this is going to look a lot nicer and it's going to give you a sense of what's going where. And then the last one is the text scenario summary. So it's just going to give you all the information on everything that you've done. So who your state trustees are, how you've divided up the scenario, what gifts you've created. So it's like the will without the legalese. It's just a bit more of a digestible format for the client. So those are the three summaries. Then you've got your documents. So these are all the documents you can generate with the system. Today we're going to do the single will. So you just click on single will, you check off these two boxes, and then you have a couple more decisions. So signing date, you can change it. You can take it out and put it in manually in the will later when you know your signing date. Registered asset designation, this is if you want to confirm or do new designations for the registered assets in the will. Joint designated asset confirmation, this is basically something that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held on a resulting trust. Counterpart is if you're signing a counterpart. Simplified is a shorter will with less definitions and powers. A will guide is a nice little chart at the end of the will that guides the client to different clauses. And cover page is just a cover page. And then for witnesses, you can pick anyone else who's a user on your account, or you can click this blank box and you can manually enter their information in the document. And you can generate your affidavits as well. And then you just click on the generate button and it's going to give you a Word document that's fully editable, so you can make any changes that you want. I'll just review it briefly. So this funds and plans clause, this is going to appear if you click that registered asset box before you generate the will. Assets passing outside of the will is if you click that joint asset box. Here's some definitions. My children means John and any other child born to, because we checked that box on the provisions tab. Here's our appointments. Lauren, if Lauren can't act Jordy, if Jordy can't act John. Here's our funeral arrangement. Here's the special disposition of personal effects that populates when you gift the general personal effects in the initial gift section. And then here's our residue. So Lauren, if not Lauren, this trust for the children. And then ultimately, half to Jordy, half to Epilepsy Toronto. And if we scroll all the way down, we're going to get to our nice little will guide that's going to guide the clients to the different clauses in the will. So that's how you'd go through it. Then you would switch over to Lauren's, you would review all of her information, and then you'd generate her documents as well. But before we wrap up, I want to just point out this little question mark button up in the top corner. So if you click on it, it's going to bring you right over to our help desk, which has got lots of articles on how to do different things in the system. And it's also got courses. And specifically this eStates Planner certification course, it's going to give you sort of all the information you need to know about how to create a will using eState Planner. And the good thing is it's a free course, it's self-paced, so you can go at your own pace. You can do different sections that you might want to learn more about. But I would really recommend taking it if you're trying to get to know the system better. But that about wraps up the session, but does anyone have any final questions before we go?
Are you able to put in corporation names on multiple wills?
Yes. So if you go to the Assets tab, and then you add your asset in here, you would go Private Company Shares, and then you'd make sure this corporation name field was filled out. So let's just say it's ABC Corp. And then I would change this to ABC Corp Shares. And then when you go to generate the multiple wills instead of the single will, it's going to populate for you automatically. So you're going to want to make sure it's added as an asset on the assets tab, and that corporation name field is filled out, and then it will populate in the secondary will.
Okay. And also, when you have a husband and wife who have their children from previous marriages and don't want their spouse included at all in the will, which scenario do you pick?
So
So they have
you would,
joint assets that will pass automatically, but their own kids are their beneficiaries. So for it not to say if my spouse survives me and all that.
so if you even if you're not giving anything to the spouse, you can still create the same plan for the surviving spouse scenario and the descendants only, because it's saying that even if the spouse is alive, it doesn't have to go to the spouse. You can say if the spouse is alive, it will go to the kids. But if you match these two scenarios, it's not going to refer to the spouse at all.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Someone asked about
Kayla, can I
conduct
just
wills?
jump in and say hi for a second?
Yes, please, Jordy.
So, hi, everybody. It's Jordy. Just wanted to thank you for doing this webinar, and hope it's helpful for you. One little trick on that, if you're doing, let's say you're doing second spouse, you don't want anything to go to the surviving spouse. So you would, as Michaela said, you fill in the surviving spouse, and then there's a button to copy it to the next scenario automatically. And eState is smart enough to know that if the same scenario, the same gifts are in both scenarios, as Michaela said, it's not going to print it twice. It's just going to say, pay it to my kids, for example. So.
Okay. Yeah, because I just did one like that, and the first one came out okay, but the second one kept referring to spouse, and I didn't want her in there at all. So I don't know what I did wrong there, but I guess I have to hit those first two scenarios.
Yeah, I would just plan in the first scenario and then just copy the gifts over in with that button, that copy to button, and then they're identical. But eState would print it twice if they're not. It checks to make sure it's a complete match, because if there was any difference, it would do it twice because it knows there's a different distribution on those based on those scenarios.
Okay, and in a case where people don't want, like we have clients that say, absolutely, I don't want my brother to ever share in this. So if my kids are dead, then a totally different doomsday, then you just add those people in like she did, like she added you in as 50%.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's exactly the same. What eState does, it doesn't do it for siblings, but it does do it for children. If I exclude a child, for example, it looks at all the scenarios and says, oh, you've excluded a child completely. And it's going to print a clause that excludes, a specific exclusion of children of that person clause in there.
And
So it's
the exclusion, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question about codicils. So eState doesn't do codicils right now. We just don't see that many codicils anymore with word processors and things like that. So it's not something that we support at the time right now. But I mean, maybe down the road, if the demand is there, then we could create a provision for that. But I'm not sure it's that efficient. I'd rather, anyway, I don't think would be that efficient to do it using eState.
Okay, and where does the RESP clause come in? Like I entered one with minor children and I didn't see it automatically there.
Yeah, you would do it in the second scenario. So let's say you've got a RESP, and all you would do is in the second scenario, you'd give it the beneficiaries, the children. You would drag it as an initial gift, right?
Okay.
Because it's not technically a designation, right? So now when you generated the document, you would see that it would automatically have an RESP clause that says, I appoint, I direct that my RESP not be collapsed, et cetera.
Okay, great.
That's an initial gift.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah. Anybody else have, or anyone have any questions, any other questions about these, anything that they're doing? These are all great questions, by the way, because they're things that you run into when you're first trying it out and sort of learn and how to do it. So I appreciate actually all those questions. They're very good.
So, sorry, one more thing. When
Sure.
I did one will, in the beginning definitions, it says, my spouse means so-and-so, my child means so-and-so. My siblings, like if I don't want that in there, do I just delete that in Word or does that show up automatically?
No, it's only going to show up if you give away, if you've made a class gift.
Okay,
So you could delete it manually if you do, but typically I like to define a gift because siblings, for example, if your father had a child that they didn't know about, they would be your sibling. And that's why I prefer to use names, and that's what
right.
eState does. But it's only going to put that definition in the will if you've actually given a class gift somewhere.
Okay, well, I named him as an executor, so he was in there. But then it came out in the wife's will and I didn't want it in hers because she didn't pick him as an executor. So I did something wrong there. That's not you.
Yeah, it's just that somewhere you made a gift to siblings. That's why it would appear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
Well, it says, oh, I need to define this class because you've used that class. That's the idea.
right. Okay, appreciate all your help. It's
Sure.
certainly fun to play with, and I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, and don't forget, as Michaela said, that question mark. If you're in the middle of something and it generates something and you're not sure, oh, I don't know how to do that, you just click on that question mark at the top right of eState, and it'll bring up the live chat, and you can flip a note to say having problems generating the RESP clause, don't know where it is, kind of thing, and we'll get right back to you if we're not live on there.
Okay, well, it was Sunday night. I doubt you.
That's true. Michaela will tell you, not Sunday night won't do it. Yeah, we're not there.
So much.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Over to you. Back to you, Michaela.
Thanks, Jordy. But yeah, as Jordy mentioned, we're here to help. So if you have any questions along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. So you can either email support, you can email me directly. We're happy to get on a Zoom and sort of walk you through it. But yeah, thanks again for joining me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.